Thanks, Stephen. Thank you all for coming. My name is Matt Cook. I'm a Vice President at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Institute for 21st Century Energy, and I just wanted to thank you all for coming, but give you a little background, take a couple minutes to give you a little background about the Chamber and what we're trying to accomplish with the Partnership to Fuel America. I'm going to turn it over to Brian Herman, who's been kind enough to join us from the Canadian Consulate in Chicago, who will talk a little bit more about our relationship and our energy relationship with Canada and how important it is to the United States and how much we benefit from this great trade relationship with our neighbors to the north. And then we've also asked Ross Eisenberg to join us, who's from the National Association of Manufacturers, and we're going to ask him to talk. He's going to talk a little bit about what's happening to manufacturers and what's happening as a result of some of the shale gas and shale oil boom throughout the country and the benefits that it's having to manufacturing industry throughout the country. So we'll cover that hopefully for about 45, 50 minutes or so, and then try to leave some time for Q&A, and hopefully we can have a conversation, a little bit of a robust conversation here. So I'll get started. The Institute for 21st Century Energy was formed about 5 years ago at the U.S. Chamber when a number of businesses across industry sectors had raised with the Chamber that energy and energy certainty and energy development issues were becoming more and more important to them, and the lack of policy and the lack of focus on the need for a North American kind of energy policy and what our future was going to look like was important. And whether you're in finance or transportation or in the energy sector, that there needed to be some more focus on the positive benefits of energy development. So certainly, Ross actually came from the Chamber. There's a lot of people who had been working for years on fighting what we consider bad public policy, but we needed to be the arm of the Chamber that was out talking about sound public policy and the need for some common sense energy reform. So we do support an all the above energy policy. You hear that commonly, more coming out of Washington these days. We find that some people mean, when they say all the above, they mean all of the above the ground. They don't believe in what comes out of the ground, and they don't believe in supporting the need for that sort of development. So we do support a true all the above that includes coal and natural gas and oil and nuclear, and in fact we support the use of alternatives, and we support the use of finding new efficiencies in energy. So, but to that end, we had recognized that there was a need to get businesses engaged, and we felt we were the best suited to find small businesses and small business organizations throughout the country that were involved as public leaders, as leaders in their communities, as people who ought to know and ought to be speaking out on behalf of energy and the need for energy policy. And particularly with regard to Canada, we recognized that there was this important relationship with Canada, and there was tremendous benefits to our economy. And so in the midst of some of these other sorts of benefits we're talking about, we needed to talk more about the benefits of our relationship with Canada and the importance of Canadian oil sands in particular to some of these states in the Midwest and throughout the upper Northwest. So the Partnership is an organization that we formed last year as a network of small business and business organizations that recognize the need to continue to develop these resources in Canada and what their benefits are to the United States. There's about 80,000 jobs currently in the United States that are dependent on Canadian energy development up in Canada and Alberta in the oil sands. I think there's been identified about over 2,000 companies, about 49 states that are selling goods and services up to Canada today. And in addition, we recognize the benefit to energy security. That for every barrel of oil that we develop here in the United States, or that's developed in Canada that we import, we're not having to import from a country that doesn't have our best interests in mind. And that's a big deal, and that's huge for us, and it's huge to our future. And along with that, there's a tremendous benefit to the jobs, to our economy, and frankly to our future interests and what's going to happen with stability, and what's going to happen if we can try to start solving some of our energy problems here in the United States, and together can we resolve some of our energy security issues going forward. Canada, and Brian will get into this, as a safe, reliable ally. We have a tremendous trade relationship with them. We import more oil from Canada than any other country in the world, which is, 8 months ago, if you would have said that, people would still be raising their hand and saying Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, and Venezuela all supply more oil. But because of the Keystone issue and because of some other recent issues, it's been starting to become more of a common understanding that Canada supplies us with a lot of energy. These numbers are a little dated at the bottom. I'm sure Brian will get into that a little bit, but when we started putting these slides together and some of this information from last fall, we were recognizing that we import about 24% of our oil from Canada today. That number's going to go up and has potential to grow even greater. For every dollar that we spend importing oil from Canada, about 90 cents comes back in the form of trade, which is huge. They purchase a lot of goods and they spend a lot of money purchasing manufactured goods and services from us that are a great benefit to our economy. So, as I mentioned, we're in 11 states. The partnership is focused first on starting in these states. Most of the Midwestern states we chose because there's a lot of Canadian refined products coming, a lot of Canadian crude coming in here, and a lot of refined products being manufactured here in the United States, in the Midwest. A lot of refineries throughout the Midwest that have been using Canadian crude for a long time, and will continue to do so. The states in the north, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, primarily because of the benefits of the Keystone Pipeline. So we felt these were key target states for us of where we needed to get businesses better educated and more engaged as energy advocates. The states, in particular North Dakota, the Keystone Pipeline doesn't go through that area, but there's benefits to domestic energy development as a result of Keystone. That pipeline, and I'll show you a map in a minute, we'll have an on-ramp in eastern Montana that will allow crude that's being developed in the Bakken region into the pipeline so it can get down to refining centers in the Gulf region. There's a hole in the middle because we chose not to go to Iowa. Everyone goes to Iowa during political season. They spend a lot of money. There's a lot of resources being spent on politics and noise, and so we just didn't feel it was worth our effort. But as well as it was just no point of dedicating resources, and as well as the fact that these other states have a greater benefit from the Canadian energy coming in there. We have about, as of a couple weeks ago, we had 289 members. It's grown since then. We're at over 300 today. And when you start to consider that these are just businesses and business organizations, and when you consider the companies that are involved with the economic development organizations, the manufacturing councils, the chambers of commerce, is that we far exceed 300 members in our stature and our ability and our reach. And you look at your employees and the people that you talk to, we feel that we're building a network that's very effective in being able to communicate on energy issues throughout the country. And this is just a sample of some of those organizations. It's a small sample throughout the country, but they range from some pretty good sized business organizations to some mom and pop restaurants and storefronts. We get folks from office supply companies, insurance industry. We've got a lot of a good breadth of industries are involved in either understand the direct benefit of energy development or the indirect benefits of energy development for our country. So I'll go to Keystone and just try to go through this a little quickly. The Keystone Pipeline, supporting this project was a no-brainer for the Chamber. We looked at a $7 billion investment by a private sector company that would create about 20,000 jobs and have tremendous economic benefit, not only in the short term, but in the long term. Not only from the crude and the energy coming in and the benefits to manufacturers and to consumers from that, but also, frankly, from the sales tax and the revenue going into some of these communities throughout these states and throughout the country. And so it was a little disappointing. From the onset, we've been promoting that the president needed to grant the permit. The permit was required because it crossed the border. Then the delays were just only hampering the benefits and the jobs and economic development that would benefit our country. So where are we today? Last fall, President Obama had indicated he was going to delay any decision on the pipeline permit until spring of 2013. We had encouraged, like a lot of people, that after 3.5 years of environmental review that this project needed to move forward. But and then Congress in late December passed a bill that required the president to make a decision by the end of February. If he didn't make any decision either way, that the pipeline permit would be granted. So in January, he decided to reject the pipeline permit request, primarily on objections from people in Nebraska who had raised some concerns about some environmentally sensitive areas in their state and the route that was being taken through those areas. So he denied the application. In February, TransCanada decided to move forward on building the portion from Cushing, Oklahoma down to Texas. That portion that doesn't require a presidential permit. Again, the benefits to domestic energy development, there's a bottleneck of oil, crude oil in Oklahoma now that needs to get to refining centers, and so there was a need for this pipeline, and so TransCanada announced it was going to get to work on that, and they started building that this summer. And then in May they submitted a new pipeline application and went to work with the state of Nebraska resolving those issues that Nebraska had raised. Nebraska had to pass some legislation to kind of improve their process for dealing with these sorts of issues, and so they've worked very closely with TransCanada throughout the summer, and just recently completed their whole public review process, and now TransCanada has put forth a favored route that is sitting with the Department of Environmental Quality in Nebraska today, who is dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and hopefully going to have the application on the governor's desk any day. They've indicated it would be there sometime this fall, so that the governor can then put forward his decision whether he supports or not to the president along with TransCanada. So we're continuing throughout this process to say it needs to move forward, it needs to move more quickly, and we need to get this pipeline built. So with that, just wanted to, before I turn it over to Brian, I just wanted to ask you that to consider as we're talking about these issues. I talked a little bit about Canadian energy and the importance of the pipeline, but there's tremendous opportunity that's in this country that's happening because of resource development. And the opportunities are happening because of innovation and people in the private sector finding ways to come up with solutions, and particularly with natural resource development right now. We'll talk a little bit about oil and gas, and that's a lot about my background, but innovations is making tremendous strides, particularly in the last few years in the energy sector. There's issues that we talk about today that we weren't even talking about 10 years ago. And it's creating tremendous opportunity for people in Pennsylvania and Ohio that have been looking for jobs. Tremendous opportunity for people in North Dakota. You hear all the fantastic numbers about 3% unemployment. You hear about steel mills reopening in Youngstown, Ohio, and places that have been in Rust Belt cities for years. Indian companies investing billions of dollars in petrochemical plants in Pennsylvania because of the energy resources that, through innovations, we've been able to find ways to develop. And we're going to continue to come to you and try to promote to you that you need to be engaged, and you need to speak more loudly about those benefits and those opportunities. And while innovation's happening in the alternative energy sector, and it should be happening, it's continuing to happen, and allowing us to get to resources and use them more safely, more efficiently, more cost effectively in the coal sector, in the gas sector, in the oil sector. And we have great opportunity to, working with our friends in Canada and to create this North American energy independence, to create an opportunity where we're perhaps more energy secure and have more energy self-sufficient, and the numbers are starting to add up. And so with that, I'll have an appeal for you about the partnership when we wrap things up, but I'll turn it over to Brian and ask him to talk for a few minutes about our relationship with Canada, its importance to people in Wisconsin, importance to people in the United States. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to you and Steve for the opportunity to speak. My name is Brian Herman with the Consulate General of Canada in Chicago, and I'm joined today by my colleague Susan Evans, who is a collaborator of mine and who does a lot of work on the energy file. I wanted to say that the Consulate General in Chicago covers the states of Wisconsin, Illinois, and Missouri, as well as a portion of northwest Indiana. So we're often here in Wisconsin to talk about trade in general and energy issues. Some of you may know someone we deal with, Aaron Roth of the Wisconsin Petroleum Council, who focuses on energy. We have a productive dialogue with him trying to promote an understanding of the Canada-US energy partnership, as we do with Matt and his colleagues. We also have a productive relationship with an organization called Clean Wisconsin, because as we talk about energy issues, we also want to make sure that the correct facts are emerging about the environmental side of the energy equation, the sustainable development of energy resources, which we think is important. I often start my talks, and Matt, you'll have to stop me when I run out of time, okay? Ring the bell or something like that. But we often make the point that the Canadian presence here in Wisconsin is often underappreciated. Yet many people don't know that the first settler of Milwaukee was a fur trader from the Montreal region, or that the first mayor of Milwaukee was a Canadian fur trader who also started the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. So, you know, our presence here has deep roots. Even though I do point out to some people I speak to that Matt Canada is not a Canadian. So, we've provided an information kit which goes over some of the basics of the trade relationship and the energy partnership. I'm taking my life in my hands here by saying there's even a set of PowerPoint slides that are a general presentation that I prepared for today, but it takes a different approach to the energy discussion than the one I'd like to just go over. But we've also got in that kit something called our state trade fact sheet, outlining Canadian trade with the state of Wisconsin. It's deep and it's very productive. Canada is the top export destination for 35 U.S. states, and that includes Wisconsin. Our bilateral trade is about $11.1 billion per year, ranking you 14th among states that trade with Canada. You exported almost $7.1 billion of goods and services to Canada, which was almost a third of your total state exports last year. And you sell more to us than your next 7 markets combined. And in fact, you have run a trade surplus with Canada. So I think that's important to state. On the energy side, I think this is important to Milwaukee companies and Wisconsin companies. You have Joy Global, or PNH Mining, which sells an awful lot of equipment to the Canadian mining industry and the oil sands industry. You have Bucyrus, or what is now part of Caterpillar, which does the same. There's companies like Enerpac of Menominee Falls and Walker Forge of Clintonville, which also are part of the supply chain that feeds into the larger equipment manufacturers who in turn sell to Canada. As Matt mentioned, about 90 cents of every dollar spent on buying Canadian oil comes back in terms of purchases that Canadian companies make to help them develop the oil sands. And we want to see that continue. Matt's spoken about the Keystone XL pipeline. Our relations are much more than that, but the Keystone XL pipeline is important. You'll often hear me talk when I look at the pipeline issue about integration and partnership, because we have an integrated energy market in North America, as Matt has mentioned, and we have a partnership in terms of the energy supplies going back and forth, and also the two-way trade flows. So on the trade side, we often say we don't sell things to each other, we make things together, because so many of the supply chains are integrated cross-border, that what we need to do is to keep that moving. So on Keystone XL, I'll just, Ambassador Gary Doer, Canada's ambassador to the US, and your ambassador to Canada, David Jacobson, were recently at a global business forum in Banff. And, you know, Ambassador Jacobson said that the relationship is strong because when we have differences, we talk about them, we don't get into fights, and we don't fuss about them. Ambassador Doer said, I bet 6 beer will get the Keystone XL project done after the election campaign. I think it will happen. Getting it through Nebraska is slow, but the biggest element is that the majority of the American public wanted to go ahead. So I think when you ask Ambassador Doer, he will say President Obama had a chance to say yes or no to Keystone XL, and he said yo, because the thinking is that based on our mutual needs, this will go ahead. For Wisconsinites, though, I think it's important to point to another pipeline system, and that's the one operated by Enbridge. Their 1,000-mile-long Alberta Clipper or Southern Access Line runs from Superior through the state of Wisconsin down to Chicago. Matt has mentioned several U.S. refineries are geared to handling oil from Canada's oil sands that are fed by that Enbridge system, or the original Keystone Pipeline, which, as the map showed, started operating in 2010 and runs through Missouri and over into Illinois. A lot of refineries are depending upon supplies from these two systems, and that includes Murphy Oil of Superior and the Flint Hills refinery on the Wisconsin-Minnesota border that feeds a lot of product into the state. And I think it's important when we're talking about an energy partnership that I mention the role played by hydro from the province of Manitoba in Wisconsin's energy dynamic. And that includes the 100 megawatt power sale that was announced in May of last year that will cover the period sort of looking out 2021 to 2027, with the possibility of hydro from Manitoba being expanded from the agreed 100 megawatts to perhaps as much as 500 megawatts. So having said that, I'd just like to look at some of the broader issues about the partnership. So in 2011, our bilateral trade was $689 billion. Many people don't quite understand the magnitude of our trade relationship, and that's, $1.9 billion of goods and services crossing the border every day. Over 8 million U.S. jobs dependent on trade with Canada. That's 1 in 23 U.S. jobs. I mentioned the fact that Canada is the top destination for states like Wisconsin. We have a Great Lakes regional economy, which we often like to talk about. That's, the 8 U.S. Great Lakes states and the 2 Canadian provinces of Ontario and Quebec that rivals nations. It's got a gross product that ranks 4th in size globally, with the United States at the top, then China, Japan, and then the Great Lakes region, if it was a country, would be the 4th largest economy in the world. By population size, the Great Lakes economy would rank 12th. So it's an integrated system around the Great Lakes, throughout the Midwest between Canada and the United States, and in North America between Canada and the United States. And it's important that we believe audiences understand these broader elements of the ties that bind us. Matt has mentioned we are a strategic partner of the United States when it comes to energy. We're the largest supplier of all forms of energy, not only oil, but natural gas, even though that's changing quickly, uranium for nuclear power, and hydro for electricity. So that's 91% of your gas imports now, but as I say, that dynamic is changing. 33% of your uranium imports, 98% of your electricity imports, and 26% of your crude oil and petroleum imports. Canadian oil production is forecast to increase from 2.8 million barrels a day in 2010 to 4.7 million barrels a day in 2025. It's a North American resource, as I've said, open to the market. We don't have a national oil company like so many oil producers around the world. This is freely available for the market to invest in. Supplies can continue for a long time. We have the 3rd largest proven reserves after Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. We're right next door. We're every bit as committed as the U.S. is to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, to producing energy more sustainably. That's why we're working together with the United States to have similar or parallel guidelines on vehicle emissions, on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, on having the same target internationally to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, simply because we are an integrated market and it's important that we act together in concert. With $177 billion in forecast capital spending on oil sands development in the next 10 years, A significant amount of that will be spent on purchasing material, equipment, parts, and services from suppliers in the United States. I've already said 90 cents of every dollar comes back in terms of goods and services purchased here. We estimate that oil sands development will on average contribute between $8.4 billion and $15.9 billion to the U.S. economy between 2010 and 2035, supporting between 93,000 and 175,000 U.S. jobs per year. And studies suggest that the total earnings of these workers will average between $4 billion and $7.5 billion a year. Greenhouse gas emissions, I mentioned the sustainable side of energy development in Canada. Greenhouse gas emissions per barrel of oil produced from the oil sands has been reduced by almost 30% since 1990. The oil sands industry is investing heavily in innovative new processes to reduce costs, increase efficiency, and reduce the environmental impact of oil sands production and refining. The process and its implementation, how we monitor the environment, how we show that we are in fact investing in trying to reduce the environmental footprint, it's open and transparent. So it responds to the concerns of many who have often questioned our reliance on fossil fuels. And what we've tried to do in communicating our message is to say, everyone wants to make the transition ultimately to a low-carbon economy. The question is how we do that without so devastating our economies that we all suffer. So what we want to try and do is to build on the reality that fossil fuels will be a substantial and important part of the energy mix for the foreseeable future. But that what we want to do is develop those resources sustainably and efficiently, reducing costs, reducing the impact of greenhouse gas emissions. A lot has changed in the energy industry in Canada and in the United States over the years, and so we spend a lot of time countering what we call the frozen facts. Some of our critics do pull out facts of life from an industry that was following certain processes 20 years ago, but things have changed substantially today. Canada represents only 2% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and the oil sands represent, 0.15% of global emissions. Oil sands carbon intensity, as I said, is decreasing. Provinces like Alberta have introduced important environmental monitoring systems to show people that we're not hiding anything, that as the oil sands are being developed, the impact of that development is being carefully measured, monitored, and the facts of what is happening published for all to see, so that there can be no misinterpretation of actually what is happening. Everybody will have the facts of what oil sands development actually means. Alberta was the first jurisdiction in North America to regulate large industrial greenhouse gas emissions. When their system was introduced in 2007, large emitters were required immediately to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 12%. And they had three compliance options: to reduce emissions, purchase offsets in Alberta, or pay $15 a ton towards a technology fund. Now, this technology fund is important because it's run at arm's length from government. It supports development and application of transformative technologies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So while many people criticize Alberta because it's the source of so much oil sands production in Canada, we often have to point out that there is a fund that is investing money from the industry in finding new ways to in fact produce oil sands oil more sustainably. I also like to point out that even while we're heavily focused on the importance of oil in the relationship between Canada and the United States, Prime Minister Harper of Canada and President Obama introduced something called the Clean Energy Dialogue in 2009. And that is a mechanism for the two countries to collaborate together, to invest together in clean energy research and development, and in things like carbon capture and storage, as well as building a more efficient electricity grid. I mentioned integration when I started. If you look at one of the maps in the kit we've provided, I think there's two maps that are particularly important. One shows the entire system of oil and gas pipelines that link Canada and the United States. Quite often people look at a map that just has the Keystone XL pipeline on it, and they say that that pipeline is going through sensitive parts of Nebraska. Why do we need it? But many people don't look at the entire panoply of oil and gas pipelines that already exist, linking the U.S. from east to west, linking Canada and the U.S. from north to south. Also, if you look at that map, you'll see the integrated nature of our electricity grid. We have part of the west coast of Canada supplying electricity to the west coast of the United States. The same on the east coast, but there are parts of the continent where electricity is imported from the United States into Canada. There's even parts of the continent where oil is imported by Canada from the United States, even as we're a large supplier of oil to you. So the idea is that the energy partnership means a two-way flow. And so that having said, I'll just summarize by saying that we're a reliable partner, we're a secure partner, we're right next door, the trading relationship is mutual, the energy partnership is mutual. What we want to do is to see that continue, and we hope that through dialogues like this we'll have a chance to explain from the Canadian perspective how important we see the energy partnership, and to benefit from your advice about the things that we can do to make it clearer for people, but also to improve the messages that we communicate. So thanks very much for the opportunity again to speak.
Let's Ross Eisenberg from the National Association of Manufacturers to come up and share some information on what's happening with manufacturing and what's happening in the United States as a result of some energy developments.
Sure, thanks. Good morning. So thank you for having me, Matt. And as he mentioned, we are colleagues from my prior job. Before I came to the National Association of Manufacturers, I was the day-to-day energy policy person, energy environmental policy person at the Chamber. This keeps happening. This thing keeps going. I don't know how to make that stop. Anyway, I have a similar role at the National Association of Manufacturers. So very quickly about NAM. NAM is the largest manufacturing association in the United States. We have about 12 to 13,000 members of all shapes and sizes, from major Fortune 500 companies to small couple-person manufacturing, small businesses. The vast majority, 90-something% of our members are small businesses, and they all are energy users, either producers or users. We've got the whole gamut in our membership, just like the Chamber does. So the reason that manufacturers prioritize energy is that we are generally energy-intensive businesses. Manufacturers represent about a third of all the energy consumed in the United States. So these policies matter tremendously to us. And just wanted to start by saying we at NAM believe we are on the verge of a manufacturing renaissance. But and as you can see here, we are the largest manufacturing economy in the world. The key, though, is policies. We have to make the right policy choices to continue the upward trend that we're having in manufacturing, and energy is no exception. So we did a study, and this is what the picture I've got here, and it was a multi-year study. And what we found was that because of our policies on taxes, energy, tort, and trade, it's 20% more expensive to do business in this country than it is in our 9 largest trading partners, and that's excluding the cost of labor. I need to figure out a way to make that stop. So now I want to actually single out energy. Energy actually baked into there has a competitive advantage. We have a 3% advantage when it comes to energy, baked into that 20% disadvantage. So we're actually doing pretty good internationally, competitiveness-wise, when it comes to energy. The key, though, is we can actually start reducing that 20% gap if we broaden the energy gap. And this is where policy choices come into play. When you think about it, we really are a unique energy country when it comes to what we have in terms of resources. We have more coal than anybody else in the entire world. We have a reliable fleet of 100 nuclear power plants. They generate 17 to 20% of our electricity at any given time. And we've made significant growth in renewables, and all the while we're getting more efficient, as Matt said earlier. If we really had one vulnerability, it's been in the oil and gas space, where we were increasingly dependent on foreign sources. Well, that's significantly changing, and that's significantly changed over the past several years thanks to technological advances. At NAM, we did a study at the end of last year, partnering with PricewaterhouseCoopers, to determine the impact of all of the new shale gas plays specifically on manufacturing. You've seen a lot of talk, you saw it at the debates the other day about the number of jobs created and things like that from developing our unconventional energy sources. And at any rate, we did one just to focus on manufacturing. And what we found was that a full and robust development of all of the shale gas plays across the United States, so all the different pockets of shale that we found and that is sitting there, could lead to 1 million manufacturing jobs, just manufacturing jobs, by the year 2025, which is a significant amount of jobs, because you think it's just manufacturing. This doesn't count all the indirect and sort of fall-on jobs that you get in addition to that. In addition, the lower feedstock and the energy costs that would result from this development could help U.S. manufacturers reduce natural gas expenses by as much as $11.6 billion annually by that same time, 2025. So there's a lot there. This doesn't even take into account the unconventional oil resources, like the oil sands, like some of the shale oil that's out there. I know there are folks in Washington who are taking a look at that as well to try to tell the whole story. This is just the gas portion, and it's unbelievable when you think about it, particularly when we were 5-7 years ago, we're talking about importing all of our natural gas. We're building import terminals on the coast, and now we're actually, frankly, the reverse of that. This isn't just estimation. This really, this is actually really happening. So we projected it, but the reality of it is every couple of days we're seeing a new announcement that a huge manufacturing facility is going to be opened to take advantage of lower energy costs. And you can see here that the bulk of them, the gray, are petrochemical sector facilities, but you're starting to see others spring up. The two green ones are steel sector. You can see some of these are fertilizer. Actually, I don't think I put those on there. And you're going to start seeing more and more of these. Some of the energy-intensive industries, like cement, like iron and steel, like fertilizer, start to take advantage of this very, very, very plentiful and affordable amount of energy that we now have in our country that we didn't have before, that we didn't have just a few years ago. So, before I kind of stop, I was thinking about stopping here, but I do want to get into sort of the policy side of this. There's a new economic normal. I have members come in here all the time and say, look, there's a new normal as to what really constitutes a profit for us in the years following the recession. And so there's also this new normal when it comes to regulation. These are actual responses that each of these industries gave to Congress when asked, hey, this is a year and a half ago, what regulations bother you? They're all over the place. Everybody's got a different one. Everybody's got about 10 different ones. And again, it's this new normal that's sort of clicking in as a result of more regulation on business. On the environmental side, which is what I do for a living, it's not getting any better. This is frankly EPA's own. Now, we made the chart, but this is what EPA has said it's going to look like over the next few years. And you can have the slide, you can read them if you want, but the point is that it's pretty bad. These are just what's hanging out there right now, still waiting to go final, that haven't gone final, specifically because of the election. And sitting right there is hydraulic fracturing guidance on the use of diesel, and it's a very, very powerful rule out of BLM on what you should disclose, and actually a requirement that you have to now get a federal permit before you conduct hydraulic fracturing activities. Those are very big, very expensive regulations that would have a significant impact on where we explore and how we do it. Same thing with the Ocean Policy Plan and Waters of the U.S. guidance. This stuff really impacts this energy development, and it's just kind of hanging out there, and it either will or will not get finished in different ways, shape, or form, depending on how this election turns out. In addition, there are greenhouse gas rules on refineries and a whole bunch of other things that will impact the cost of energy. So to drive that point home, why this all matters and why policy choices matters, these are the maps of areas that would be in the penalty box, for lack of a better word, for ozone and particulate matter air quality regulations. They strike me because they pretty much match this map up here. And so we're talking about getting to all this new energy, and I do feel that, like, the genie's out of the bottle on this stuff. I don't think that anybody anywhere is going to be able to stop the market from moving this stuff. But that being said, you can do a heck of a lot to slow it down with regulations, and you can do a heck of a lot to slow it down with policy choices in Washington. And so we just need to be aware of it. We need to be having these discussions and just be talking to people about it, and knowing that there are, at a local level, there are very, very significant impacts from the choices that we're making where Matt and I live. As usual, elections matter. It's going to matter significantly with respect to the maps that I showed you before, to the regulations that are out there. I don't necessarily believe that even if a Romney administration came in, despite a lot of the promises he's making as to repealing certain regulations, I don't think that that's necessarily going to be able to play out without Congress getting a bill to his desk, which is a very complicated thing. But they matter. And so do congressional elections. So, you know, my last sort of point to you is obviously vote. Get everybody else to vote that you can think of. If you like what's going on, great. If you don't like what's going on, great. That's why we have elections. But more importantly, engage with each other. Engage with my organization, with Matt's organization. You know, let's build this a little bit more. The Keystone Pipeline is a very good example. The reason the president had the cover to deny that permit is because he had folks on the ground in Nebraska making a whole mess of the whole thing. I don't think there's a fundamental understanding of of how energy works and how these decisions are made. But frankly, all politics is local. Right now, I'm fighting over some stuff with coal exports in the Pacific Northwest. It's a very, very local thing, but the decisions are ultimately going to wind up in Washington. And so, you know, these things kind of bubble up, and the discussions we're having here are just as important, if not more, than the ones I have on Capitol Hill in Washington. So with that, I hope I was helpful, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Do we have questions? And I know there's people from the energy sector here too, so feel free to jump in, or if there's things that you feel need to be corrected, or if you want to, as questions are asked, feel free to jump in.
As far as as far as alternative energy, in particular solar, now that fracking is out there and natural gas seems to be a lot less expensive and there's many years of availability, should that change our commitment to solar, for example?
It's a good question, and it comes at a time when natural gas is really cheap, and it's, you know, affecting investments in solar and wind energy. It's also affecting investments in nuclear energy. There was, you know, a few years ago you had about 15 applications before the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and people thought, you know, Fukushima was the biggest had the biggest impact on whether those investments would go forward, or those requests for those permits. But it's in fact been the low cost of natural gas that's had the impact on whether they'll build these projects and whether it makes sense to build them. But we think so. We think that there's a role for solar. There's a role for, we do need to have a more diverse energy mix. But the problem, I think, is going to become, particularly with some of these alternatives, is when and how can they stand on their own 2 feet? And it's at the chamber, we support some of the subsidies that have happened for wind and solar and the battery technologies and some of the other sorts of alternatives, just as much as we did with coal technology and clean coal technology, with deep water drilling for the oil industry. That these make sense. They make sense to help some of these industries move forward, but there has to be an end date. There has to be a point that they stop being subsidized when they start to make sense in the marketplace. And in particular, with, I get a point to the wind energy industry, the biggest investments happen when they renew the wind energy production tax credit every few years, and when it's happened to expire, an investment stops because it hasn't made much sense just yet. So we're going to continue to promote they have a role, but we're also going to have to say that there has to be a point where some of the subsidies have to end. But with low natural gas prices, it's the same that people are starting to say, ask us when we go around and do these conversations. Ross had a slide up there that talked about all the regulations, and one of them he didn't point out was this new source pollution standard for coal-fired electricity generating plants. It's going to have a huge impact on this country because it's basically those proposed rules state that you can't build a new coal-fired power plant in this country, and it's going to be impossible almost to continue to operate some of them going forward. So if you're going to have to expire or stop using all these coal-fired power plants, that many of them have been paid off in this country, many of them that utilize this abundant, really cheap resource that we have, thousands of years worth of coal in this country that we can use. We're going to transition to an abundant resource that we're just starting to realize that we have now with natural gas. How long is that going to remain cheap? And two is it make sense to go away from one source solely to another and when we have a lot of the other cans. So we need to have this energy mix. So there's a lot of questions that have to be answered, and while these innovations are happening and it's tremendous, I think we have to try to kind of figure out what the rules of the road are and what we're going to be following.
It's a compliment. What is the actual number when you're saying that solar gets in subsidy versus natural gas? Because my understanding, there's a lot of big numbers thrown at solar, but solar is such a really small piece of the energy mix.
Well, do you know off the top of
So,
your head?
as far as how much they get subsidy-wise, I honestly couldn't quantify it for
Yeah.
you. There are a few different tax credits that you can take advantage of in the renewable space. There's a PTC for wind. There's a tax credit called the once again, I believe, tax credit for solar. And after the stimulus they received, they were really big. That was kind of the point of the stimulus. There were some even that you could take a tax credit for installing the equipment. You could take a tax credit for manufacturing the equipment. You could take a tax credit to actually build a facility to build the equipment. Like it was significant. And look, we supported the stimulus. Chamber supported stimulus. Kenny supported the stimulus because of the economic rut we were in at the time. We saw it as a necessary thing. So jobs were jobs. And you can argue right now as to whether or not that's good or not. But bottom line, it depends on the prism you're looking at. Every industry has, because of the way the tax code is set up, every industry has tax advantages they figured out over the years and things that aren't so easy over the years. It stinks. It's a complicated thing. But they are, at the end of the day, a very small piece of our generation portfolio, and they're not necessarily forecasted to get any cheaper over the long term, in a huge way to compete with $2, $3 natural gas.
Interesting when you're saying that too is you look at some of these areas, and particularly in the northern part of the country, where, particularly with Canada, where we have wind generation that we some of that electricity goes up to Canada, and then at times when it's not as working as well, we import hydro to replace the wind. There's this back and forth relationship, but also just to speak to some of this quickly with some of the trying to figure out what's going to happen. We talked a lot about Keystone and the inability to build infrastructure. We have all this natural gas coming online that we still need pipelines built for that. Pennsylvania is still importing gas, even though they're sitting on probably the biggest gas reserve in the world right now. They haven't quite, they're building the pumps and they're building the drilling rigs, but they're kind of capturing them right now and sealing them off until they get the gathering lines and the other pipelines built to be able to distribute it. North Dakota was supposed to be the wind energy capital over the last 20 years, and they've never been able to build the transmission lines to get the power out of them. We do a pretty good job in this country of building pipelines and distribution networks, but we have to do better. And these problems like with Keystone only continue to highlight some of the issues that we're having with building refineries, with getting permits for other sorts of manufacturing facilities, and getting the distribution networks built that we need. And there's a lot of jobs at stake. In fact, one of those one of the companies that's moving into northeast Ohio is a steel manufacturer that's moving in to build pipelines in order to be able to sell them right into Pennsylvania and some of that area around there in order to move that gas onto that area. Well, I say, you were involved with the project. No project was
I was the only staffer that survived.
was a project that the Chamber did a few years ago to identified about 350, 400 different projects, energy projects specifically over about a year or two period in advance of 2011 that to try to look at what's happening with all these energy projects that are being stalled or postponed or even just mothballed and taken off the books. And you identified about, was it 400 different companies?
It was 350 something.
Projects, yeah.
And the interesting thing was, and this was, we used like a 4 or 5 year time frame. It was probably 2007 to 2011, 2006, 2010. And what we found was, yeah, there were a lot of coal-fired power plants that were stopped, but there were actually more renewable projects that were stopped. 100, maybe 150 or 175 of those projects were renewables. And then the common thread throughout, it was all electricity generation. It was gas, coal, nuclear, it was renewables. Common thread was that if you didn't like it, if you didn't want the project, you just had to use whatever laws and regulations were in place to stop it and just delay it as long as you possibly could until the developer walks away. Because every day that it's not up and you're not actually moving on it, it's going to cost money, which is frankly the strategy. I know let's be realistic. That is the strategy. It's, they don't necessarily know that they're going to get an up or down decision ever on it. It's just a delay long enough for the TransCanada to eventually give up along the way, which doesn't seem to be happening right now. It's a good thing, but
So,
that seems to be.
Yeah. So it's in part of what we're doing and trying to get people more engaged and more involved on the ground is to talk about some of these issues. But you're looking at, was it a $500 billion investment in these 350 projects, almost 50% of them which were renewable projects. They weren't even oil and gas or nuclear. They were renewable projects that were being stalled by the same green tape that was stalling these other conventional energy development projects. So,
Scott.
that's good.
Yeah, Matt, you had mentioned the greenhouse gas NSPS for utilities. I think that and a lot of these other rules are great examples of how Wisconsin is uniquely impacted by a lot of what's going on with the EPA. We get 65% of our electricity from coal. We're the second most manufacturing intensive economy in the country per capita. We've got we're the number one paper mill in the state. And almost every paper company has a coal-fired boiler. So, the greenhouse gas NSPS, which I think will ultimately trickle down to a industrial boiler greenhouse gas NSPS and boiler MAC and sulfur dioxide standards, new ones, new ozone standards, and NO2 standards, so many others. And I think these have the potential to be just devastating for our manufacturing base in our energy sector, and almost every one of them is not finalized yet. And so I'm wondering, Ross, to your point of elections and what can be done to try and reverse course on this, how many of those rules that are still hanging out there do you think a President Romney, should that happen, could be kind of unwind?
Yeah, I don't know. I've got actually a few press calls about this the other day, the past couple of days, and my press shop won't answer them because they're not really, I don't think they're going to like the answer. The answer is probably not too many. I mean, it depends on sort of how this goes down. So let's use the hypothetical that Romney wins in the midnight period, and then you get a new administration. The big daddy of them all is the greenhouse gas rule, because that does, it does stop all coal-fired power plants from moving forward, and it sets a precedent that I think can trickle down to existing plants, which you will do if you get full holders of this administration. So the underlying regulations that spawn that is it's the enabling regulation and all the infamous suite of things that were affirmed by the Court of Appeals over the summer. We being the Chamber and NAM, are still actually litigating that case just to preserve the option and the possibility that in a new presidential administration it could be modified. That being said, I don't know how legally you can do that. And he said he will do that, but I don't know how you can legally do that. It would take an act of Congress, and I'm not terribly positive on Congress to do anything. So that's going to be a significant challenge, but I think they will try. There are always ways to try. The others that are hanging out there, so then you have to think about what gets done in midnight period. They're under a statutory deadline to finish particulate matter acts by December 15th. They're under a statutory deadline to finish the cement act by September 5th or by December 15th. That includes a lot of underlying stuff that also supports the boiler rule. So they could probably finish the boiler rule if they wanted to by December 15th. I have to think they would finalize the greenhouse gas power plant rule. It's a legacy issue for them. If you are one of those folks that got in there after 8 years of push and thought, I gotta just blow this whole thing up, this is the one you want to finish, right? I mean, this is, and then, then you have to start thinking about if they're going to finalize that in the midnight period, are they going to go after existing sources, do something like a direct final rule that says, well, by the way, this applies to existing sources, just to create as much chaos as possible, which could always happen. Then you got to, so then there's a bunch of things that could happen. If the Senate flips, then all of a sudden you get to use the Congressional Review Act in the Senate, which takes only 51 vote threshold to try to pull some of these back. If it doesn't, things get a lot more complicated. And then the other side of it is, a lot of these regs, even if they were to modify them, I think around the administration could pull them back and say, look, we're going to reconsider it, we're going to take another look at this thing. But they couldn't ever just say no more. Like, you're never going to say no more boiling. You just have to make it better. You're never going to say no more utility because there is a mandate in the act to deal with mercury emissions from power plants. So you're going to have, so it's a complicated answer, and I probably went about 5 minutes too long. But I think you're going to see a valiant attempt to pull a lot of these back. But it's, again, you have to be very cognizant that a lot of these are going to stick. I know we're going through budgets right now, and I'm basically advising that we're going to have to really get into a lot of these things, regardless of who wants to do it. So that's where we're putting our money, and we got it.
Probably time for one more. Go ahead.
I think last year or a year ago, T-Bone Pickens was on every television show talking about the natural gas, and we should start using more natural gas and going over. And even today you talked about how inexpensive it is compared to some of the other energy sources. So what is the issue, or can you just fill us a little bit more in on why is natural gas more useful if the cost is so low? Is it that cars and we need the distribution system so cars can switch over to natural gas? Is that a viable option? So could you just...
Well, there's some history particularly with coal. I mean, coal was the cheapest source for a long time, and a lot of our boilers and a lot of our other, and frankly, that we couldn't get at that gas before until the technology advanced in order to enable us to get at a lot of this gas that was available and has made it so cheap. So we have all this abundant gas now that we're looking for markets for. We're looking for places, and it's probably its greatest benefit is less in transportation fuels and more in commercial uses and industrial uses. But there's plenty of opportunity there. We use we have. Could there be some innovations that happen in the transportation fuel sector? Absolutely, but we don't have the infrastructure built just yet. We actually don't have some of the engines built just that will enable us to find ways to use it in long-haul trucking, for example, and some other ways that could make sense to have natural gas stations, placed on routes that truckers use all the time. There's a lot of advancements that need to happen before we can do that in the transportation fuel sector, but. It's just really was a result of not being able to get it, not being able to get it as cheaply as we can today. But now we're poised in an area where some of the T-Boone Pickens and some others are looking for markets, or looking for ways to get that price back up a little bit, in order to continue to have people making investments in natural gas. And we use a lot of it in this country for, in addition to just heating boilers and heating your homes and whatnot, but also for other industrial uses. And that's where we're saying the petrochemical industry is coming back into this country to take advantage of it. Where in other countries they use a lot more oil and heavy oil to make plastics and other chemical based manufacturing uses, we use natural gas in this country. So that's going to foster some of that and find markets there. They're actually have just permitted the first liquid natural gas export facility in Louisiana that's going to be built. For what we're paying about $2 per 1,000 cubic feet of gas. Here you're paying about 12 or 14 in Japan right now. There's other places in the globe that are looking for this energy. They're also looking for coal too, so we're trying to find ways that in this country when coal production and use is going down that they might be able to export more. So there's certainly tremendous opportunity there, but that's what Boone Pickens is trying to get at, that there needs to be markets, there needs to be some innovation and investment made in finding markets for this cheap gas.
Yeah, I mean, to the sort of other side of this, politics is one of the reasons a lot of this not happening in different ways. The slide that I showed you about all the different petrochemical and other energy-intensive manufacturing investments are being made because they are in their heads depending on anywhere from $2 to $6 gas over the next 25 years. when you start talking about diverting it to other uses, whether it's exports, or transportation, or electricity generation, those manufacturers start to freak out. And we don't really have a reliable answer on that.
No.
I mean, we're neutral on that for the most part. I know the chamber's neutral on that because it's conflict exists, nobody's been able to get a credible answer.
And we're not just working tobacco, as Brian said, we used to import a lot of gas from Canada, and now that's changing. They're looking to find markets for their natural gas. The globe is becoming very competitive, and huge industrial developments happening in China and India and other parts of the world. So there's opportunity there, and opportunity creates, businesses find solutions for opportunities, and it's going to continue to try to find a way. So it's going to get to be pretty interesting in the next few years.
Matt, I'll just briefly pick up on one point that you just mentioned, Ross mentioned too. So when it comes to something like the Keystone XL pipeline, it's true that a lot of people who are opposed feel that if they delay this long enough, they can stop the project. And as Ross said, TransCanada has remained committed. But there are many people in Canada, in the industry, who said, well, yes, we're tied in inextricably to the United States as a market for our energy supplies, but why aren't we looking for other markets? So now you have major applications in Canada to build new pipelines from the oil sands of Alberta to the west coast of British Columbia, because they say the markets are there in Asia and we can move our oil there. In Canada, we've never had a pipeline infrastructure that runs west to east. So while we're pumping all this oil from Western Canada, in the east we're importing much more expensive oil from offshore. And now Canadians are saying, well, why don't we have a pipeline that connects the oil sands of Alberta to eastern Canada? And so there are all these projects, but the point we make with those who are trying to stop the Keystone XL pipeline is, if they feel that this is a way to stop oil from being produced, it is not, because oil will find a market. And while 99% of our oil now comes to the United States, we hope that that will continue. But the oil producers will always find a market. And if it isn't here because the pipeline infrastructure isn't here, it will be somewhere else.
So with that, we've just been a little bit over an hour here. I want to thank you all again for coming and appeal to you that we're going out and doing this, and we built this network, as I said, to get people more educated and become better energy advocates. And it will help us, particularly as Ross indicated, and we've seen happen in places like Michigan and Nebraska and Montana and other places where when we get business involved, when we get business educated and start to be spokesmen, and even if it's not only just with your legislators and with people of influence, but also within your people in your communities and your circles, within your companies and with your employees, or whether it's at chambers or at Rotaries or manufacturing council or even at church or over cocktails in your neighborhood. When these issues arise, to be able to speak about them and be able to counter or be able to offer some good insight, and to also look at it as there's a lot of barriers and there's a lot of issues that we need focus on, and we need policies that make sense. But there's tremendous opportunity right now, and we're talking in about things that 10 years ago weren't even part of our dialogue with development of oil sands and technologies that are enabling us to see this tremendous opportunity here in this country. So we want to be a resource for you. We want to be able to provide information to you, and hopefully the Chamber and NAM and the Canadian Consulate to be a resource to give you information. If you want to sign up for we'd welcome you to sign up for the Partnership to Fuel America. We don't ask for any money. We don't ask for anything other than we can put your name on our website, and then we can send you information and keep you updated on what's going on in Washington, what's going on with our relationship with Canada and oil sands. We'll ask you on occasion if you'd be willing to sign a petition or send a letter to the President. We've actually also had someone come in, one of our partners who owns an office supply store in South Dakota came to Washington and testified before a Senate hearing about the importance of the Keystone Pipeline and what it would mean to his community. So we want to be a resource for you. You have questions that arise on energy issues, you can contact us. If you need speakers for events, we would like to do that as well. Our website has a lot of information on it, and so we want to ask you to become more engaged. We try to do these twice a year or so in each of the 11 states that we're talked about, so we can give you a forum to hear about what's going on, to try to bring up to date on some of the issues, and to introduce some new issues to you as well. So with that, I want to say thanks again for coming. I'll be able to stick around for a couple minutes to try to answer some questions, but also thank Brian and Ross for coming and helping out as well. So thanks, and I look forward to seeing you again.